and we said, this is who we are. And if you're against law enforcement, you're entitled to that opinion, but that's not the official ethos of this company. And now that's a little bit more mainstream. I'm happy to say I think we were on the right side of that one, even though it was still super stressful, because when there's more people involved and there's employees and you have all these people relying on you, that does rattle you a little bit of, man, should we kind of modify our stance and play the business game a little bit so this thing doesn't come crumbling down. And, in the moment, you don't have the vision to know it's going to be fine and just stick to your guns, because that was kind of the first time I really got hit with that dilemma of like, do we need to become all these other corporate brands where the buzzwords and, kind of going in any direction the corporate winds happen to be blowing that day. But now we're in a unique position because it is family owned, that we want to have those hard stances. And when we want to come on this podcast and talk about the election, no one's telling us what to do, and we can be authentic. So that's a kind of asymmetric advantage we have against the big brands, that it's like, one, you're steering a cruise ship, and two, you can't take a stance like I can because you have some guy in New York telling you what to do. And that's pretty cool.
You're listening to the Born Primitive podcast.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Born Primitive podcast. How we doing, Tony?
Morning, Bear.
You feeling good?
Yeah.
See, you're wearing some prototype pants that I'm jealous of. I noticed the sample team clearly gave you a 36, 30, or 34, 36.
36.
Those should be 36 regulars. I'm just saying.
Hey, I was the one driving the vision behind it.
I know.
So they're giving me the first prototype. These are going to be. I've been going around the office selling everybody. These are going to be a big time player, I think.
And you think you're going to call it the Maverick pant?
I don't know. That was the initial.
It's got a decent ring to it.
Yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah,
fits
our persona.
Well, cool. Hey, for today's topic, everybody, we actually just had a guest last second cancel for last second emergency. So we kind of synced for 2 minutes and said, what the hell do we want to talk about? And we thought it would be kind of cool to dive in, a little look under the hood of Born Primitive. We've seen it got some good feedback, and we do episodes like that. So I want to kind of talk a little bit through maybe some things the everyday person might not know about what it takes to run a business like Born Primitive, and also, get into some of the entrepreneurial side and what that journey looks like. And I we've done it a little bit in previous episodes, but before we kind of go deep, Tony, I want to just kind of frame up for everyone listening. I've done a few talks at some different entrepreneurial panels, and one of the biggest things I think is important to call out initially is like how difficult it is to start your own business, whatever that is. And I think people get overwhelmed of like, I have people hitting me up like, hey, how do I start an LLC? And like these really stupid, like, I don't want to say they're silly specifics that they're worried about, like how to start an LLC. And what I usually say is, hey, like you can Google that in 2 seconds. If you're worried about like figuring out how to like start an LLC, like we gotta redirect you a little bit, because there's way bigger shit you need to be worrying about. But I think statistically, the most recent stat is that 8% of startups actually succeed. But a cool stat that I uncovered recently when I was at another panel was that, and I don't know what the statistic is exactly, but if for second time entrepreneurs, that metric goes up I think well north of 50%. So that's kind of cool. And ironically, that's me. I had the failed business before Born Primitive, was dumb enough to play another hand immediately without being deterred, probably because I didn't know any better. And, here we are. So, I just think, for those entering or potentially considering the entrepreneurial journey, know what you're signing up for. The deck is definitely stacked against you. And I would say, a lot of guys ask me like, how should I fund it? And, what should I consider? And I think where you are on the risk continuum matters. If you're in your 20s or 30s, or I'll just say if you're single with no family yet, whatever age you are, you should definitely be way more willing to take risk. If you're, established with 3 or 4 kids and you're married, that's probably not the time to put a lien against the house and get a second mortgage for this, $100,000 you need to do the first product order and whatever else you need to start up. So definitely consider that. Also consider your family situation. It is going to probably be pretty taxing on your time, and particularly if you're going to work a primary job, to still maintain regular income. And I would, a lot of people say, and even us included, it's like, oh, burn the boats and you got to go all in. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, particularly where you're at, because there's plenty of hours in the day. You could still keep your income but have the side hustle going. And I would be a hypocrite if I didn't call that out, because that was me for 8 years of Born Primitive. I was active duty. So I can't say, oh, go burn the ships. Well, why was I active duty then, right? So, but realize with that, you're sacrificing a lot of your own lifestyle now, because there are only so many hours in the day. And if you're working a regular 9 to 5 that's demanding, and then, every other waking minute, you're trying to feed this little newborn, which is pretty much what it is, while maintaining, a good relationship with your spouse and being present father, all these, or mother, any of these other things. There's trade-offs, and something has to give. So when guys are considering that, I try to bring these different considerations up. Where are you at in your life right now? Who else is depending on you? And that should help you determine where on that risk continuum you land, as far as like, do I want to raise capital? Can I go get a line of credit with the bank for 30 grand, or do a HELOC on my house? I do that all the time. I love HELOCs. We can talk about it. I mean, I've used it to help Born Primitive a bunch. So I just bring that up because it's a question frequently asked. And I would say for people that have the itch, and you have that knack, like then probably go for it. But if you're like half in, half out, it's working a 9 to 5 and working for the so-called man can be still a great gig. And there's advantages to that. If it's done right, you don't have to bring it home with you, and you can really be present and have other activities, and you can really have a balanced lifestyle. So I just bring that up to kind of frame up the conversation, but also, looking under the hood of Born Primitive a little bit is like making people realize it is not as glorious as you think. And even very successful businesses are kind of in the that pressure cooker all the time. And I would say we're included in that. So, Tony, I'll say this last thing about, cash flow. Yes, I think that was the first topic we wanted to talk about, was kind of cash flow of a business, especially for a business that sells products versus services. There's a huge difference. And I always joke, if I ever do another business, I'm not going to sell anything that is actually a real thing. I'm going to sell a service. You know what I mean? I want to go be a private consultant for brands and help them build their brands and just bill them every month. With a services business, once the service is rendered, you get paid, and that's the end of it, and you make the margin right there. Well, when you sell goods, you have to reorder the next batch of inventory, and you're in essentially perpetually kicking the can down the road to actually make money. So let's say in a given year, you make, I'm just making up numbers, like, you make $8 million, and you're like, wow, this was a great year for the company, healthy bottom line. Okay, well, everyone should be able to pull a good amount off the table from that, and let's rejock and do it again next year. Well, guess what? You want to try to make $10 or $11 million the next year. So what do? At the end of that year, you put in a giant order to purchase inventory, because of course that's what you need to sell the following year. But here's the caveat: you can't write off that expense as a a write off with Uncle Sam. So if you made $8 million and you wire $5 million on December 31st, in theory, you'd be like, oh, well, I can write off $5 million. Now I only made $3 million. Uncle Sam says, no, you can write off the goods of that order when you sell them, which in a perfect world is the following year. But if it's inventory, if you order wrong, some of that stuff you might be selling 2-3 years later. So you can't actually write it off. So what happens is Uncle Sam says, hey, Born Primitive and the owners, which of course I'm one of them, you guys made $8 million. So you owe us 40% of that, because our income is passed through to individual owners, called pass-through income, the way we're structured. So Bear, you owe your share of 40%, of that. So we have to pay Uncle Sam, when at that time is due, a large amount on money we didn't actually make, right? Because from a cash flow standpoint, we only made $3 million, right? And that's of course to keep fueling the business, payroll, the rent, all these, our huge meta budget that we spend on advertising. So it's something that people from the outside don't realize, that is an interesting dilemma. Is like, your bottom line could be massive, and you could actually not be making money in a practical sense. The bottom line is going to show it, and your tax returns are going to show it. But that's the dilemma that people face, with a goods business, is that inventory, and eventually, if you were to say, all right, we're never going to order again, and we're just going to, whatever's left in our warehouse, we're going to sell, you would actually make a ton of money in those last 9 to 12 months, because you wouldn't be, sending more money out. So I'll stop there. Obviously, I know you're very well read into this to help us direct this, but I thought that was one kind of thing that we could dive into that others might not realize for like a goods type business.
And before we dive into there, I want to rewind to something you said initially when you kicked off, is kind of on if somebody's reaching out to you asking, how do I start an LLC? And you're kind of like, hey, that's the silliest thing. That's a silly thing to be asking. There are 10 other factors that you should be considering more thoroughly rather than that. Knowing what you know now, what would be, let's use 3 or 4, but if it ends up being less or more, what would be those 3 or 4 things that you, if you were about to start something right now, that you would be spending an inordinate amount of time focusing in and making sure they were squared away before starting the business?
I think the only thing that matters is being brutally honest of like, is this actually a differentiator in the market? So is it better, faster, or cheaper? Maybe it's all 3. Then you have the trifecta. But looking at it, you need to be, and that was the mistake I made with my first business. I thought there was a market there that wasn't actually there because me personally just thought it was cool. Had I taken 2 seconds and kind of assessed, I would have been like, okay, I know me straight out of college, living in a frat house, drinking from kegs, thinks this is relevant because it was literally like for a keg product, so that's why I'm using that example. Yeah. Oh, this is so relevant. Like everyone needs this. It's like, no, idiot. It's because you've been living in a frat house for 2 years and you just drank 1 million beers in college. So you think this is relevant, and it wasn't. It was relevant to the beer industries, and that's where we missed. We threw the Hail Mary and they didn't end up taking it. So I think it's you really need to assess what makes you different and why it would even succeed in the first place. And some might just recognize a market opportunity. Let's make an example on the spot. Let's say you're trying to get a deck rebuilt, and you're getting all these quotes from these guys, and you get 3 different quotes, and every guy's like, best I can get to you is in 5 months, right? And every guy says that. That might trigger, okay, there is potential, there's an opportunity in this market, because if the going is so good with these guys that they're quoting me to come back and do this job in 5 months, I think I can make decks better than these guys. I'm going to make this my trade, and I'm going to go figure it out, and I'm going to have better marketing, and I'm going to be more customer facing. And that could be something you're like, this is just okay. I think there's room in the market to insert myself and do it better, but mainly just because there's so much demand. The market equilibrium has not happened yet, right? And that can slide. So that would just be one example where if you just assessed it from kind of your own feel, where you could, kind of just come up with opportunities. But I think that, rather than worrying about, like, what's my business plan going to look like? And like, how do I even start an LLC? You actually need to just red sell your idea and see if it actually makes sense. That seems obvious. But if I were to ask you, okay, how is this going to how are you going to be differentiated from your competitors, and you can't give me a compelling answer, I would say then just take that out back and shoot it, because you'll waste 2 or 3 years and a bunch of stress. That being said, there is incredible value to that failure, right? Because so much of what I learned from the failed first business, I was able to apply. Now, I was by no means a master. Of course, we still aren't. We're still rolling with it. But there was a lot of thematic things that I did incredibly wrong the first time, just because there's no manual for this, that I was able to immediately apply and at least avoid those initial landmines that I stepped on the first time.
But correct me if I'm wrong, you still, heading into Born Primitive, so you had what was the name of the keg business?
Extreme Kegware.
Extreme Kegware. So Extreme Kegware goes down the drain. You very quickly turn around and have the idea for Born Primitive. You still didn't put together like a thorough forecasting business plan, did you? Or did you at least then have some of those, like, because there I've seen, and I bet you could speak to this too. After I built a little bit of a knowledge base within this space, I'll have people for, say, a coffee shop or something sit down and be like, well, here's what I'm thinking. And you look at it very quickly and you're like, you're going to be in trouble very quickly unless you are able to scale your top line in a way that covers your fixed costs. So just out of genuine curiosity, did you have that in place when you started Born Primitive, or was it just kind of like, what do we need to get this first PO? And then you were just rolling from there?
We just totally winged it, man. And as far as even like, there was never a budget. It was like, just do what makes sense, because like you're so resourceful when it's that small that like you have visibility onto every penny. I remember like our first sponsored athlete. I still remember this. We were paying her $200 a month. And that was like a major expense, but it was like a big deal. It was like our first sponsored athlete. But there was no like, oh, what's our athlete budget? Like, does this, you know what I mean? It was just like, does this make sense? And that's probably not the best way to do it looking back. But I also don't want it I don't want people to their business to be overly like academic. Like, oh, I have to build myself a fancy PowerPoint and that's my business plan. It's like, write that thing on a napkin if you have to. Like, don't worry about that's like the silly shit that won't matter, because guess what you think you're going to do in a year is probably going to be quite a bit different. So don't put too much time and attention on some of those little details. Like, just get a direction of travel, and play a hand and be ready to pivot from there. Because I mean, we went from making compression shorts, right? And then look where we are now. I mean, we've pivoted a million times. Now we have an outdoor academy where we're teaching long range shooting and land navigation. There's so many things that kind of pop up that allow you to pivot and evolve that it'll be unrecognizable from what you think it's going to be, unless it's like, a deck business. Then, okay, it's probably going to look like a deck business, but your tactics will evolve. Maybe you're doing direct mail campaigns. Maybe you realize, oh, we can do a text campaign to get new customers. Maybe we do local meta advertising to the 757 area code with some cool creative, you know what I mean? Like, your tactics will evolve and you can be more effective, but yeah.
I think because I agree completely on like over formalizing things. I do think the one place, and we've gone through this. I mean, think back to 5 years ago versus now on the importance of feedback on financials being as quick as possible. Like that has huge implications, because even if you're in year 1 or 2 of starting a business, you're going to know when to take it back out and shoot it very quickly. Now that shouldn't, if you still believe in it and you still think there is a differentiator and there's a marketplace fit, you should drive into that. But without that real, like why I say we went through it is, we had a pretty bad lag there for a while as far as like what the financial story that was being told versus our kind of intuitive sense, because there's a whole underbelly to a business where, yeah, we all had access to our Shopify where we could see what we were doing on a monthly basis. But then as we scaled and we're building out payroll, we're building out our systems, processes, we had an international presence. It's like that underbelly was growing in a way that there was a lag between the numbers coming out of that underbelly and how that related to our top line, to the point where we had to make some really hard decisions several times. 1 year, 23, that was 22 or 23, where we really had to make some tough decisions because that lag was so significant that it kind of caught us by surprise.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about this. As soon as you think you have it figured out, there's a new curveball to the equation, and that's why we're just like the ragweed, man. Like, we'll grow on anything, and you can't kill us. And it continues to happen. I mean, just as we're recording this, the tariffs were just announced, yesterday. Our shoes now, it's going to add like $22. I think for the Patriot One boot, it adds $24 for the shoes. I think it adds $14, which to you guys, that might not sound like a lot, but guys, when you're ordering 15, 20,000 units, and margins are already kind of tight, like that's a big freaking deal. So it's like, man, we're in a groove, and then boom, or global pandemic. Now there's a supply chain issue. So, then everyone over orders because there's all this extra cash. Everyone's buying like it's going out of style. Now there's, instead of 4-month lead times, it's 8-month lead times. So you have to order this just ridiculous order, but there's this new forecast because there's all this new demand from people sitting on their couch with a bunch of money, that want that cheap dopamine of buying something. So we think this thing's going to the moon. So we order for that. And now you're sending millions and millions and millions of dollars overseas. It's delayed. And then you get it. And guess what? By the time it arrives, consumer sentiment is now changed because people are starting to realize, the money's going to run out, and they're starting to be able to spend it on other things. Now they're going to concerts, and, they're able to go outside again. So everyone over-ordered, and now it's a race to the bottom. Everyone's discounting it. For those that have been with us, you notice in 2023, it was like every month, flash sale this, because we had to move hundreds of thousands of units and get that cash. So it's like, now you're dealing with that. And then, let's throw in an iOS 14 update from Apple, which we don't need to nerd into, but for the listeners, made it much more difficult to advertise on Facebook and Instagram, which is a main driver for us. The efficiencies went off a cliff overnight, which was our main channel, right? So it's like all these things swirling together, and that kind of came to a head in 2023, where we had to take it on the chin. We had some hard meetings, and, even stupid shit like, hey, we're spending like $3,000 on snacks a month. Like, no more snacks. People can bring their own freaking snacks, right? And it sucks to have to tell your employees, like, hey guys, like, we've gotten out of control. I know you love your Red Bull sugar frees and your Gucci snacks, but like, pack your own snacks. You know what I mean? And it's a little humbling because you're like, man, we're born primitive. We can't even, and snacks are back, so we're good. But those are, things that you got to do. And I think we had that tailwind, as everyone did. It when the going is good, you scrutinize your own tactics much less because you're winning. It's like winning football games. If you're winning 28-7, like when you're watching game tape the next day, you're probably not quite as down in the weeds of, okay, on that play, like, you know what I mean? I could have done this different. You're like, well, we won pretty handily. Like, let's debrief it, but let's move on to the next week, right? We were winning 28-7 for a while there, and we were better. We weren't as good as we thought we were, right? And then when you get that headwind, that pressure, it forces you to really look at everything. And then we looked like our athlete marketing budget, and we're like, man, we are pissing money down the drain. You know how many influencers were paying $500 a month, $800 a month? It's like death by 1,000 cuts. Okay, what is this actually doing? Okay, scrap the whole thing. Let's see what happens. That's pretty much what we did, and nothing happened negative, right? All that money comes back into the balance sheet, right? So that pressure was actually really good for us. But in 2021, when everyone had that tailwind, all these direct-to-consumer businesses were so inflated. You look at a brand like Allbirds, they were like the darling poster child of direct-to-consumer businesses. Everyone, they're on all these magazines and they're going to all these conventions, and like they're held on this pedestal, and then they went public and their stock's down 90%. And they weren't even making money. Like, they weren't even profitable, but that's how inflated it was. It was like, if you're growing revenue, we don't care. We'll give you a revenue multiple. It just got nuts. And everyone had to sober up. And I'm actually glad that happened because it thinned the herd. There's a lot of brands that aren't here anymore. So advertising on Facebook and Instagram isn't as crowded as anymore. And, the brands that had the foundations and principles in place were able to survive, but it definitely required us to make a lot of changes. And I think definitely sober up a little bit of, like, because in 2021, I thought we were untouchable. I'm like, this thing is going to the moon, right? You realize probably, I would say 40% of our revenue was probably complete bullshit. Because guess what? People are getting a check, $2,000 a month. They're sitting in sweatpants in their living room. They're not going to concerts. They're not doing this. Of course, you just sold a shit ton of joggers. It's not because all of a sudden everyone's loyal to Born Primitive. It's because there's nothing else to do, right? And thank God we got ahead of that, and kind of could read the tea leaves on where that was going. But yeah, 2023, we took it in the chin. And then 2024, we rallied and came back swinging. And I will say one thing that we did that others didn't do is in 2023, when we were, got punched in the nose, even though we got punched in the nose, we were maneuvering, right? We stayed aggressive. We were flanking. Footwear, outdoor, tactical, all these things were happening, you know what I mean? And trying to get into big retail, getting the roadmap to Berry and trade compliant, all these things were happening, starting to take root in 2023, that any sane person would be like, whoa, you're nuts. Like, the wheels are about to come off the wagon and you're doubling down in 3 or 4 different areas. And thank God, obviously, the hay's not in the barn quite yet, but those were good bets. And that allowed us in 2024, when most brands were down, we were way up. So moral of the story, just when you think you got it figured out, just wait a day, because something else is coming and you're going to have to show your ability to continue to navigate that complex environment.
As challenging as it is to navigate that at times, it's interesting to see culturally, and you and I have both seen it now evolve over my 6 years, your 11 years of doing this, is that those trials and tribulations, and this is going to sound a bit cliche, is that the earned wisdom you get from that, though, is you wouldn't trade that then for the world. Meaning, and I see that culturally here, is like individuals that have been here for a while, when you start, you have a very myopic kind of vision of like what works. And then as you get some failures and successes under your belt, that view opens up so much that you start to make decisions with a much broader lens than you had before. And that as far as mitigating risk, and when I say mitigate risk, it doesn't mean don't take chances, as you said. I mean, I think that's one of your strongest attributes. And we have a lot of individuals here that are really good at knowing how to take calculated risk. But when you expand that lens, typically through earned wisdom of just having to go through hard shit, your ability to sense when something's a shiny object or when, no, like, guys, I know that sounds sexy, but like, let's stay focused on what's working now. You get much better at that. And then what that does is that mitigates those pitfalls that you used to fall into. A great example is the athlete kind of our athlete spend, where CrossFit was huge 2014, 2015. So we dumped a decent amount of money into supporting athletes within that space. But there wasn't a true kind of trackable system to know what your ROI was on any of that money being spent. So when things tighten up, it's like, okay, it felt like it wasn't as easy as let's cut our money there. Do you remember some of those meetings where like, shit, is this going to be, we had kind of given so much value to our athlete program that we're like, if we cut our budget by 60%, like, what is this going to do to our top line? Is this going to be something we reflect on? And then you do it and you realize, holy shit, if we don't have a trackable system to show kind of the benefits or results from any given system within our company, doesn't mean all of them need cut, but we should probably take a pretty hard look at that, because that you start to learn those lessons and then you mitigate those in the future with your decision making, having been through that before. So I mean, there's where, as much as that there is a bit of a roller coaster as to some events internally, some events externally, the perspective that gives you is so valuable. And then I often think about kind of our culture as like almost like a ship on the sea. You need some people up there in the what's the top part?
The bridge.
Yeah, that's the very top. What's the thing like the one person would sit up in the
You're
thing?
talking about like Lieutenant Dan?
Yeah.
Like up, Gump, the shrimp are that way. So I don't even know. And I'm in the Navy. That's pretty sad. Or I was in the Navy.
Birds, it doesn't matter. But
I'm going to get grilled for not knowing that. Do they still have that on?
Probably not. That's like a Pirates of the Caribbean. Yeah. But where I was going with that is that I view it as a ship in the sense of you need, and I think you're actually this a lot of times for us is like, you need somebody up in that, let's call it the fucking, the top bird's eye view, kind of looking way out into the future.
Yeah.
But then what you also need, and it relates to when things go good, I think you forget about this at times, is you need people in the engine room who are equally kind of read in as the person up there driving vision, but that are just cleaning shit up and making sure that the baseline is sustainable for the long haul, or in this case, the journey that the ship's going on. Because I noticed that too, when things are going good, it's like everyone wants to crawl up in the vision thing and be excited about where we're going, but there's still an underbelly that needs kind of cleaned up. And if you can do both of those simultaneously, you create a ship then that's fucking unstoppable, because you have people navigating where we're going, but then you have people making sure the engine and everything is cleaned up. And when I say people cleaning up the engine, like, I don't even mean entry level people. Like, you need people that really know the dynamic of the boat and kind of even where you're going to really know how to clean that up, because doing those two simultaneously just sets you up to really be not only navigating in the right direction, but have the sustainability and the systems kind of needed to get you there.
Yeah, and I'll go even further, and this is where it gets really tricky, is when you start your own business, in the beginning, you're everything, right? Or maybe you have one other partner and you're both doing it, whatever. And as you get bigger, you know, to use the ship analogy, I'll use like a Navy ship analogy, like you got the bridge and the bridge wing, you know, skipper's up there, you can see over the horizon, right? You're making sure you're steering the ship in the right direction. You got to change course, you know, and then, you know, let's use an analogy. Let's say there's an issue down with one of the engines. Well, you originally were the engineer that used to be the one turning wrenches and fixing shit. So when that happens, the tendency is you want to run down to the engine room and be turning wrenches with the boys, when it's like, no, that's a disservice to you guys now. If I'm running down to the engine room, you should be, hey, get the hell out of here. You should be on the bridge wing, right? And I've gotten better at that. But as founders, it's very hard to learn that you have to do that over time. Because you have to realize, all right, if no one is looking out over the horizon, you know, we might run aground or collide with another vessel or something like that, right? So that's why I owe it to you guys. Now, do I like to go down and, you know, turn a few wrenches every now and then? I do. And if things do go astray and let's say maybe something isn't getting fixed, you know, I'll be like, all right, I need to get a look under this. But I try to choose my battles because I don't want to be overbearing or feel like I'm micromanaging. And hopefully you've seen that progression. But that's the hardest evolution as a founder, is to get away from that train of thinking of like, oh, originally we did creative and we did this and we did that. You were doing everything. You were the accountant. You were the lawyer. You did, you know what I mean? Like, and that's when building a team becomes critical. And like when I have, you know, people like you and Claire and Bruno and like Leah, all these awesome team members that we have, I don't need to go down in the engine room anymore because I know I have a bunch of hitters taking care of all of that. You see what I'm saying? And it makes it way easier because I'm like, all right, barring something crazy, like they got it covered.
On each level, I mean, we just went through it with a moment we had for the brand a couple weeks ago, is even in my role where I've grown through so many layers of it, you get really good at knowing, like for me, it's the upside. If I'm going to get back involved in something that I shouldn't be involved in anymore, the upside has to be very significant, because then too, you're building a sustainable team where they know, like, because they're that when you remove yourself, so let's say you fully delegate off, it isn't, you should get re-involved at times, but it should only be when there's a problem no one else can solve, or a problem that no one else saw. Like that's when it's time to get back in, where you will drive your team fucking mad, is if every little thing you treat as a level 10, meaning like it's a level 3, meaning, yeah, it needs fixed and somebody needs to fix it. It's like, notice it, maybe have a conversation, say, hey, I trust you to solve it. Where it gets in, and what's crazy, and I've went through this, I know you've went through it even to a higher degree as the founder, is that it is hard when you used to solve level 3 things all the time, and now you should set your threshold that if it's not a level 8, I'm not getting involved. It takes a lot of practice reps to stop jumping back into those level 3s. And then it takes even more practice as it gets to level 6 and you're sitting on the periphery going, okay, this is a level 6. It's like, no, if you're the level 8 guy, wait until it gets to a level 8. But what you like there, it's either, if you keep having to get back involved out of necessity, it's like you need to build a better team, or you need to reflect and make sure that and there, that can just happen through communication with your team members, is that you're not over jumping back in when you don't need to be anymore. But it's a wrestling match, man. It's challenging.
Yeah, and it's critical for the development of the people that are the ones solving those problems. If I'm jumping in all the time and I give the war story of, oh, this happened 4 years ago, I know exactly how to fix it, I might actually know the answer, right? But I need to like let them figure it out, let you guys figure it out, because now they have a key learning, because now it's something they've experienced. So the next time it comes around, they're like, oh yeah, we know how to deal with this. This is, easy day.
And that's that earned wisdom. When you can build earned wisdom through levels of an organization and people aren't overly reliant on the earned wisdom of 4 individuals, there you're building a really high functioning autonomous team. And that's like, and there's plenty of resources on this of entrepreneurs that have been in the game for a while, founders, even people like Elon and stuff, who checks both those boxes of like setting up truly autonomous kind of high functioning teams. Such a big part of that is delegating and trusting, but then also being able to move fast on replacing individuals, because you can't, like some people, it's just the nature of human dynamics. There are going to be individuals that maybe even screen well or interview well that get in a role and very quickly you realize this is just not a good fit for them. And it may not even be all their fault. It might just be kind of how you operate mixed with then how they operate. So yeah, really being willing to move quick there. It sets your team up for so much success. And then, and you and I talk a lot about this, is like staying ahead of high performers, or like the people that have shown over 4 or 5 years that like they can count their big mistakes on one hand, and they could count their big successes on, it would take every digit within there's not even enough digits on the body to count those. Those are the people, stay ahead of empowering them and trusting them with more and more, because that allows them to feel engaged. The thing that'll stagnate an employee quicker than anything is that they did a great job. You kind of like they got propped up a little bit, but then they hit a point where they're like, yeah, I'm just kind of like doing the same shit. I'm still executing on the same level. So there, of course, you can flip it on them and say, well, you need to take the empower yourself and take the bull by the horns and kind of make those opportunities for yourself, which that can be true in some instances. But as a leader, I think at least the leaders I look up to most, it's like they do a great job of, when they recognize individuals like that, they start to carve the path for them and say, hey, here's your path. You don't handhold them as far as their job, but you handhold them as far as their progression, because you just see a potential in them that is exponentially higher than some other individuals.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, like if they're working at anywhere, a lot of it is luck, as far as like you might be crushing your role, but you just have like a bad manager that isn't going to like be, won't advocate for you at the end of your reviews and things like that. But I think for anyone, not to get on a tangent, but over deliver on whatever it is your role is in the company at that time, and that will bode well for you eventually. And if for some reason you're doing that year after year and you're not getting recognized, go to a different place of employment, because at that point it's not your fault. But there's been people that have come in here and consistently over deliver on what is asked of them, and they're very successful at this organization. And you know, I'd say like Leah would be a good example of that. You know, we have an employee, she's now our director of marketing, came in and was a police officer, right? No brand experience at all, right? I think, did she start in customer service, right? Right on. Entry level customer service, killed it, moved up to, then she started doing, helping with email and SMS.
She was
right?
assisting with email, SMS,
Yeah.
then took
We had
over,
someone who was managing email, SMS. She ended up departing, doing the family thing. And we threw this to Leah because there was no one else. We were just like, you just have to figure this out.
Which in hindsight is crazy too, because
It's
like,
nuts.
we would not do that now.
Nuts. And we just said, we just need you to figure this out. So, you know, this is another aspect of what I was going to talk about, is seeking professional development in whatever it is that you're supposed to be doing. Don't just expect that development to come from within the organization. You know, if you're the social media person or the email person, as nerdy as it is, you should be listening to those podcasts driving into work. You should be reading those blog posts. You should be subscribing to the newsletters that are specific to your craft. So every day you're getting an email in the morning when you're drinking your coffee and you're reading how that space is evolving. And here's this new software that just got introduced that allows you to retarget in this way. And anyone should be taking that approach, because if you can become the master of that in that building, you should be the CEO. Like, there was a time where in most areas, this is years ago, I knew more than anyone doing any job at any time, because, you know what I mean? I had to go way deeper when it was Mal and I doing it. And Matt, I could speak that for Mal too. You don't want me to know more about the recent social media algorithm change than you, and you're the social media manager, right? That would be a little embarrassing of like, well, shoot, that's literally all you do. I'm running a 108 employee company, and I know that. So become the master of your craft and then over deliver. And that's like what Leah did. Every job that we gave to her, she crushed it, but did more than what was asked. And she was reliable, and it was like, you knew when it was with her, it was done. And then she was going out of her way to optimize like the email and SMS. She's coming to me and said, hey, we got to scrub this list because we're wasting a bunch of money emailing to people that never respond. So here's how we're going to cut them down. And we're going to do a last chance offer. And if they don't take that, and okay, this will save us like $8,000 a month. And like, I didn't even ask for that. I wasn't even aware of that. She, you know, was doing these, you know, her own development to become a true master. And that makes her become a senior marketing manager. And she's overseeing way more. And she crushed that. And now she's director of marketing. So that's one case study of someone who came in who was a cop, no previous experience, and just took on every role head on, and over delivered. And now you become recognized in the organization as one of the most reliable people here, and that's her reputation 100%. And that's indisputable, anyone you ask, right? So anyone can take that approach. And if you just do the bare minimum, while that's not bad, and you probably will be fine, your growth trajectory will take 10x as long. And you might find yourself in a situation where you are kind of being told what to do because you're not seen as a person that can kind of take something and run with it, but then even add to even more. You know what I mean?
There's another side of that I've found myself talking about with certain individuals, and some people have this naturally, and I think there is an innate part of some people's personality where they do this better, is that, so what you just talked through is kind of the subject matter expert, making sure whatever technical thing you're doing that you are developing and that you are the best in the room at. There's a whole nother side to this, and I think I've had a fascination with this type of thing my whole life, but then within the business landscape have seen how big of an influence this has is your ability to be clear, concise, and communicate your ideas. Meaning, like, you could be the smartest, and I see this. This is where it became me both always developing myself, but then also helping other people develop, is that I've seen people that I would rate within Born Primitive a 9 out of 10 on the technical scale, meaning they're fucking squared away when it comes to their actual job, but they're a 3 out of 10 at communication. And what I have observed is that takes them where if you didn't have the communication part in, and let's say there was some AI that could just take what was in their brain and present it, they would be a 9 out of 10. But when you factor in the way they communicate, and when I say communicate, I don't just mean the words they use. I mean your body language, the way you show up, your presence within a room. That's what, there's a cliche, like your executive presence, is that shit matters. And what I've watched is certain individuals that are a 9 out of 10 with that 3 out of 10 communication become a 5 out of 10 perceived on their technical skill, simply because they don't know how to communicate it. So there's another development piece that I've actually been honing in with a lot of individuals, is that the way you are able to boil down your ideas, the way you're able to take what you know and format it into a digestible, whether it's a summary or even the words you're using, it's gonna dictate how people think and feel about you, and that sucks. Like if the world were a utopia, you would want everyone to be perceived equally, but the reality is it's not like that. So if you can't deliver a succinct message on what you know, if you can't deliver the way forward in a succinct way, people that don't have a lot of time, so executives, they're going to start to be like, yeah, he's smart, but there's just something off there. And that almost, it can even be a subconscious thing. And what's wild is when you get really attuned to this, you can watch it happen in a room. You can watch when certain people are speaking, how the room shuts down, or when another person speaking, the room snaps to attention. And that's a good indicator of how they're able to influence. But like I said, through their presence, through how they even feel about themselves is going to seep through. Because if you're nervous as shit all the time, it's like it's going to come off in a subconscious kind of just very human way where people are going to read that. So just another one that starting out, and then if I were a business within the professional world that had aspirations of growing, that I would put some time on, because it matters. And there's really Stephen Bartlett, who he has the third biggest podcast in the world, Diary of a CEO. He's had on some really fascinating guests who that's their job. And typically it's with executives who they sit and just do coaching with them. And it's so wild to see that landscape of how many little, and it's not as if you go to a formal meeting and you're learning how to do public speaking. That could be an aspect of it, but it's just subtle ways of like even your hand gestures, how you sit at a desk, how you present something, that all matters a ton when it comes to you growing as an individual within any ecosystem.
Absolutely. Well, I know we kind of just went employee centric, but I guess getting back to the entrepreneurial side and Born Primitive, I guess let me throw it to you. What do you think is an area we should talk about that people might not know about Born Primitive that would kind of be like, oh shit, like I thought maybe the idea of your growth actually makes you in a way make less money. You know what I mean? Like that whole concept. We talked about 2021, how we made, a bunch of money and I had to loan the money to the business. Like, I don't know if that
give more specifics on that.
Yeah. So, the net operating margin of a company is obviously like, is the percentage you actually make in profit. So for every $100 you sell, if your net operating margin is 10%, it means you're making $10 for every 100 in top line revenue, right? The median net operating margin for businesses is around 8%. So if you're above 8%, you're above the median. We landed at 12.2%. 2021 days, it was like 26%. Anything above 20 would put you like gold standard. Like that's incredibly solid. But 12.2, that puts us still above the norm. And we're on a roadmap to getting that number up. We want to be north of 15 this year, Tony. I know I threw the gauntlet down with you to get us up there. So that's just some perspective. Well, if you're at the 8% net operating margin, which would put you right down the middle on most businesses, and you're growing more than 30%, and you have a goods business, in most cases, that will put you in a negative cash flow scenario. Because guess what? That 30% growth is going to require you to take more than your profits and invest it into the next year's inventory. And I think that's a lot of people, a lot of things that people don't understand. So that happened for us in 2021. We talked about the COVID tailwind and all these things. We had a record year as a company. And I probably won't talk top line revenue, but we made about $8.5 million that year. We think we're on a rocket ship to the moon with sales and everything. So at the end of that year, obviously we have to make an inventory bet that is like, well, especially now that the lead times were longer, as I talked about. So your order has to cover an even bigger period of time. Now you're tacking on, well, we might grow 100% next year. So I have to order for that kind of growth. Otherwise you run an inventory, you throttle out and you know what I mean? You can't, it's a missed opportunity, right? So we're being super aggressive. Well, we did that. And then March, April rolls around and these final payments are due. Also, Uncle Sam says, all right, Barry, you just made $8.5 million for a company. You owe us 40% of that. So there's a giant tax payment. There's these giant supply. There was a point in time, despite having a record year and making a ton of money, I had to use my HELOC against my house.
Define HELOC.
That's a home equity line of credit. So you're leveraging the equity on your house to go get a loan or line of credit it's actually a line of credit. It's not a loan with the bank, and you can use it for whatever the hell you want, right? And of course you pay interest on it when you start drawing. So we had to use that, and I think it was $400,000 or $500,000, and I had to, basically front it for Born Primitive. And I think that was for probably 15, 16 months. I didn't get that back. And me being naive, I didn't even charge interest. I don't think, maybe it was a promissory note. Maybe it was like 3%, but I definitely wasn't making money on it.
And what is the standard interest percent on a HELOC?
It's like prime plus, I think like 1.5. But at the time it was low. I was probably paying like 5.5% on it. Now it's probably closer to 9 or 10, depending on where you're getting these. So at least we had that going for us. But I could have put that in a Vanguard account in the market, and it would have been getting 10 to 15% because things were ripping. You know what I mean? So anyway, I just present that as it's an interesting dilemma. Now, hey, had we grown 15% that year, and we were like, let's just project to grow 20% next year, the owners actually could have done a giant distribution and made a ton of money, right? And that's pretty much been the case of Born Primitive from the beginning. The first Mal didn't take salary until, so I have emails from Born Primitive. That's when it was actually at snatchshorts.com, dating back to January of 2012. So if we actually want to say when did it all start, it was January 2012. Mal wasn't in the mix yet. I was working my little side hustle, setting up suppliers to try to build Snatch Shorts. We didn't actually incorporate, I think, until March of 2014. So if you're using that date, but I like to go to January 2012. Like, we didn't take a paycheck, for the first 5.5 years. I think that was July of 2017, because that's when we hired Jen. We got the warehouse. I think that's when Mal started taking a paycheck. Maybe it was a couple months prior, but it wasn't much. And it was like, she paid herself like 40 grand. So we were living on one salary, 5.5 years of effort, not a single thing to show for it. A lot of people don't have that stamina.
Did you, really quick question, because I'm genuinely curious, were you educated? Because I know Mal, of course I know you both very closely, but like, knowing Mal, she had no clue about the potential. I'll just ask the question instead of beating around the bush. Were you educating her on the potential long-term upside to keep her going throughout that first, say, 4 years? Or was it more just like the momentum just carried you? Or did you kind of say, hey, this could be huge? That, like, were you in her ear trying to keep her like enthused about it?
I mean, I think we were just so caught up in the hustle, man. We weren't even really thinking about that.
Which is crazy.
But here's a wild scenario. The 5th year of our company, we did $10 million in sales. Imagine a scenario where you're making 10 million top line and the owners aren't even paying themselves. No one's getting paid. 2 employees, me and her, and we're doing $10 million. That's insane. And we're still not taking a fucking paycheck, right? And we're living off my active duty salary. And it took over the entire house. Every guest room had boxes to literally to the ceiling. There were 5 or 6 high, because I remember, our garage was our fulfillment center, but the bedrooms was backstock. So Mal would say, hey, I need a 5-pack of extra small camo bras. And guess what? That's back corner of the bedroom. You're crawling across boxes at the ceiling. And then, of course, it's the bottom box on the 6 boxes stacked high that are heavy. You know those boxes because you did warehouse. And you'd be like, God damn it, I got to get a 5-pack of because, of course, the garage can't keep all the stock. You know what I mean? And, that's a company doing $10 million. That's probably a $30 million, enterprise value, and we're still doing it out of the garage. I remember we did our first warehouse sale that year. It was in our driveway in our neighborhood. We were like, screw it, let's just do it. We had a pretty good turn. I think we did like $5 or $6 grand in our driveway.
Can you imagine if you would have sold the company without ever taking a salary? If in that year they're like, okay, 40 million. What's your payroll? You're like, nothing. They're like,
0.
Wait, what?
And it's funny. I wonder what our net operating margin was then, because it was probably like 50%. Like, it would have been something so outrageous. But the reason I give that example is because, like, it took an incredible amount of effort and consistency before we could actually even pull any wealth from the business. And obviously, when Mal started taking a $45,000 salary, it wasn't like all of a sudden like we've killed it. And I think I took my salary, which was the same as hers, I think at the end of that year, because I wanted to be able to feed the business. I was playing the long game all along. And it's like, we're fine. I don't need a lavish lifestyle. Like, I was getting paid decent with the Navy. Like, it's like, I'm good. We got a housing allowance. There was no need to be like, oh, I want to go buy a Range Rover right now because we just did $10 million in sales. And there was no ego either. It wasn't like, oh, like we need to go buy fancy shit now because look how successful we are. It was actually quite the opposite. I think that imposter syndrome was still there, and we're still like, we literally just did a warehouse sale in our driveway. You know what I mean? Like there was no illusions that we are walking on water and we're these badass entrepreneurs. It was like, all right, what's the next problem we have to solve, and let's keep this thing rolling.
Do you think in retrospect, let's say, because I came on in 2019 and I think we were doing, let's just create a false scenario. This is not the actual numbers, but let's say you did 20 million at a 20% bottom line. knowing what you know now, do you think you would have taken, and it was even higher than that, but let's use 20%. Do you think now you would have right then, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, but I'm curious, would you have went and got a outside investment at that point at a good, I mean, you would have had strong, now who knows, when they viewed the business, they might have where they might have been adamant about really helping to support certain aspects because it was kind of in its infancy from just like a structural context. But do you think in hindsight you would have taken on an outside investment?
I think that story is yet to be told. There is a part of me that wishes I was more savvy in that world at that time, that I would have considered it. However, be careful making a deal with the devil. I'm not saying all those investors are, but we've seen the ethos and the culture of companies change overnight as soon as there's a private equity firm that buys 60%, right? I will say there was a time the brands, especially the ones that were born in the CrossFit space with us, they started doing that and we didn't. And all of a sudden they have the budget to do big athlete deals and these big endorsements because they just got a giant check. The owners made a ton of money, but then a bunch of money went to the balance sheet and allowed them, all right, here's your 3 to 5 year growth plan. You're going to go be the title sponsor of this, and you're going to go do this, and you're going to launch this new. And man, did the family miss out on some financial liquidity in those moments? Absolutely. Would I probably have a different arrangement in my life right now had I pursued that? Yes. But what's the value in me being able to come in here in a pair of frayed jean shorts after some 5x5 bench at 10 o'clock and having no one say a goddamn word about where I've been, or if I got to leave at 4:30 to go get my daughter 30 minutes early because I want to take her to get ice cream, right? What's the value in that? What's the value in if we miss a target by 2% like we did this month, not having to get on the phone with a bunch of dudes in suits in New York City saying, hey, what happened in March, right? We're good. On to the next, you know what I mean? What is the value in that? And that's why when I speak at these entrepreneur things, I tell the fellas, like, be careful raising capital, because just make no mistake, the second you do that, you don't own your company anymore. Even if, like, let's say you sold 49%, you know, which is honestly something we could do at some point, but I will be very specific on who the partner is. They might have more voting rights. And even if they don't, if someone cuts you a check for $30 million, guess what? They get to bug you on a Saturday night. You're going to pick that damn phone up, right? So don't be under any illusions that, I'm still the boss man. Like, they kind of own you. And now you're going to have to deal with that for the next 3 to 5 years, maybe longer. So it's just, what are you willing to sacrifice to have that freedom and autonomy and, when things got crazy with the culture in the United States, a lot of that money was influencing like how brands were projecting themselves, and, for things like going super woke, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, you have to have gender pronouns in your email signature, all these like stupid things that it's because you got people from New York City or San Francisco really running your company, you have to do. You know what I mean? And like, imagine if that had happened here, where I got to like put my tail between my legs and come into a meeting, like, all right, guys, like, we're going to be doing things a little differently moving forward. Like, first day with the private equity firm, like, these are the new policies. And they look at me like, what the hell happened to Born Primitive? I'm out of here. Right. So I guess it depends on, how you look at it. One thing that does bring me a little bit of satisfaction and maybe a little smirk is a lot of these brands, there's one of them, and I'll even call it out, like a brand like Noble. I think they've raised now over $100 million in capital. Guess what, man? We're toe to toe with those guys. Imagine if you gave us $100 million and you said, deploy that into marketing, what we could do with how the lethality we have with what we do here, and where that would get deployed to, and how efficient it would be, because we had to cut our teeth in the most competitive way. We were going, now, was there a big surge for them when they did all that? And did it make them a mainstream brand way quicker than us? 100%. But we were like the little engine that could, man. You know what I mean? You look at our sales trajectory, $100,000 year 1, $256 year 2. Then it was 1.2, then 2.5, then 10, then 20, then 35. You know what I mean? And I'll leave it at that. I'll let you guys, right? That was our trajectory, where some of these brands went 20 to 80. And then because, they just spent $20 million on marketing that year. Of course, so their top line grew, but they weren't even profitable at the bottom line. But there was a window of time where you didn't have to be profitable to get huge investments. They were using a multiple of your revenue not a multiple of your profit, right? And then all these predictions started falling apart of these brands that it wasn't working out anymore for all the things we discussed. And all these, investors all of a sudden said, oh shit, we actually need to invest in businesses that actually know how to make money. Well, we made money from the beginning because that's the only way to survive when you're self-funding it, right? We couldn't go lose $8 million in 1 year and then be like, well, we grew top line by 60%, so we're good losing that much. You know what I mean? Because we didn't have the funding. So I'm glad we did it the way we did it, because it forced us to be scrappy as fuck and have good habits, although it wasn't always the right tactics, but we had to learn the hard way and then adjust. Where it was when you have that backstop or that safety net of we have $12 million in our checking account, you can make some stupid decisions and still kind of get away with it. You know what I mean? You can go sign that big brand partnership that you think is going to raise all this awareness, and it doesn't really pan out, but top line went up. So like, we're good. You know what I mean? So I don't know, man. I think if I were to start a business again and it'd be completely different, I probably would raise the capital a lot sooner, but I would do it in a way knowing what I'm getting myself into, and there would be deliberate intent. But I'd be like, okay, the purpose of this is to create financial liquidity for myself, and I'm willing to sacrifice ownership to achieve that.
Does that the on the PE side of things, like what we went through with the Allbirds and some of these bigger brands where they were just getting insane evaluations, even Uber, there were a ton of them that happened then. Does that come and go in waves? Because to me, it's, and I'm sure you could find the answer to this pretty quickly, but like why? Because now it has flopped, as you said. Now it's, what's your EBITDA? Like, we don't give a shit about top line. We want to know the money, the cash flow of the company is sustainable and is strong. How did that happen in that time period? Is that something just people like PE firms are trying to like kind of gauge the market, and sometimes their risk tolerance is higher and they're willing to kind of go off more of a growth strategy, and then other times it's like, no, you need to have your EBITDA needs to be in a really strong position. Do you know kind of how that pulls back over decades? Is that something that just kind of ebbs and flows, depend like their strategy there?
Well, I think it's probably reactionary to kind of like doing it the wrong way. So like there was a window of time where a private equity firm could invest in a company and they say, all right, we're going to grow the top line revenue at all costs. We don't give a shit about bottom line. And in 3 years, we're turning around and we're selling this to the next idiot who's willing to believe that top line is the only thing that matters, right? And they were making a ton of money with that approach, but that window closed quickly. And it was almost like overnight, they all realized top line doesn't matter anymore. We have to focus to the bottom line. However, a lot of these companies that were funded by these PE firms were not set up to produce bottom line profit because they were a machine to go top line at all costs. You look at like Manscaped. I think I was looking at their financials at one point. They're doing like, fact check me on it, it's probably way off. They were doing hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, but then they were losing like 20 million a year. Normal Joe Schmo like me would look at that and be like, why would I invest in this? You guys just lost 20 million, when everyone's like, oh, this is the next, you know what I mean? Because they're pumping millions and millions, they're signing with the UFC, they're doing this. You think they're killing it, but when you look at the financials, like, this is a terrible business. So eventually the gig's going to be up, and you're not going to be able to sell to the next idiot who's under the illusion that top line. Eventually you have to show you can make money. And once the dynamic changed, these companies were in a very difficult position, because you now have to retool the entire organization to now, hey guys, let's not worry about top line anymore. The bottom line is the only thing that matters. And if we have to go down 20% in revenue year over year, but our profits go up 40%, that's the new standard. But it's like, for those companies, like steering a cruise ship, right? Especially when there's a bunch of institutional capital already invested in the business. And that's when CEOs get fired and private equity guys bring in their own CEO and they bring in their own team to kind of salvage it, because now they have to fire sale their equity to just move on with the investment. And that's pretty much what happened. But that puts us in a really unique position, because we are tooled for bottom line only, right? Like, that's because we have to be to survive. Hopefully I don't have to put another lien on a house to fund the business. You see what I'm saying? Whereas if, we had been wired $20 million and said, hey, go do good things, we probably would get a little loose. You know what I mean? We'd still try to stay disciplined, but hey, inevitably you'd sign a few more endorsements. You'd do a few more things. We'd have the Gucciest snacks in the snack room, like, for sure. A few stupid examples. You see what I'm saying, right? Yeah. So I think it sets us up in a unique way. And even more importantly, the ethos of our company has not changed, right? So when we go, and I believe that consistency over time has given us an advantage amongst our competitors, because when things got a little wild in our country, Born Primitive was as advertised. We did not waver a fucking inch, even when it wasn't popular. There was a time when donating to a charity that supports the families of fallen law enforcement officers was getting me hate mail, getting me DMs that were insane. Guess what? Did we bend a knee to those people when every other fucking brand did? No, we didn't. We kindly told them to fuck off, and we said, this is who we are, and if you're against law enforcement, you're entitled to that opinion, but that's not the official ethos of this company. You know what I mean? And now that's a little bit more mainstream. And I'm happy to say I think we were on the right side of that one, even though it was still super stressful, because when when there's more people involved and there's employees and you have all these people relying on you, that does rattle you a little bit of, man, should we kind of modify our stance and play the business game a little bit so this thing doesn't, come crumbling down. And, in the moment you don't have, the vision to know it's going to be fine and just stick to your guns, because that was kind of the first time we really got hit with that dilemma of like, do we need to become all these other corporate brands where, the buzzwords and, kind of going in any direction the corporate winds happen to be blowing that day. But now we're in a unique position because it is family owned, that we want to have those hard stances. And when we want to come on this podcast and talk about the election and no one's telling us what to do, and we can be authentic. Right. And I think that makes us, that's a kind of asymmetric advantage we have against the big brands, that it's like, one, you're steering a cruise ship, and two, you can't take a stance like I can because you have some guy in New York telling you what to do. And that's pretty cool.
Love it. Let's right there. That's the mic drop. That's the mic drop moment. Anything you wanted to make sure we touched on before?
No, I mean, guys, this was kind of just a freestyle, just to give you a little look at kind of some of the things we kick around over here. And I do get a lot of personal messages about aspiring entrepreneurs. And like I said, I think the biggest thing is really think about, is it better? Is it cheaper? Is it faster? Or is there something unique about what you're about to offer that will make you succeed? You know what I mean? Maybe it's a demand in the market. Maybe, a supply has not caught up and you can get in there, like the deck example. I mean, I'm just making shit up, but, assess that before you put it all on the line. As far as your financial commitment, again, assess where you are on that risk spectrum. If you're 25 years old, because again, look at worst case scenario. If you're 25 years old and you're single, worst case, you have to have some shitty apartment and your TV's propped up on a milk crate and you're eating tuna and you know what I mean, whatever. Like, as long as you have a gym membership and needs are pretty fucking basic at that point, right? And you can rough it. So like, I would say that individual, bet the house, because who cares? You're 25, you know what I mean?
Learn the lessons.
And yes, because those lessons are so valuable. It's going to be 10x more valuable than any degree you can get. So lean into that and don't put too much pressure on yourself, and just kind of, pick a direction to travel and go and play a hand. You're 45 with 4 kids and you're married. I probably would advise you a little differently on maybe not sliding those chips in, and hey, that 9 to 5 you have, it might not be a bad thing. Hey, can you go to your kid's softball game when you're home? Are you able to shut your phone off and have a glass of wine with your wife and be present? That's not a bad thing. So don't get caught up in I work for the man and the hamster wheel. You know what I mean? It's because the other side of it, guys, is not that glamorous. You know what I mean? It can be. There's its advantages, right? But there's also, don't get sucked into the romanticization of being an entrepreneur and I'm my own boss. Yes, am I my own boss? Yes, I am, Tony. But you find me talking to my lawyer at 8:00 at night about this lawsuit we just came in, or the banker about, and it's, there's a lot of things you're going to have to shoulder that will be outside of your normal hours. So while, yes, can I come in at 10:00 and no one's going to say anything, but then it's a little harder to shut it off ever, because you're ultimately in charge of steering the cruise ship. You know what I mean? And that person isn't allowed to go to bed. You know what I mean? Otherwise you're going to run aground. So I just offer that, but don't put too much pressure on yourself, and just know there's going to be so much learnings regardless of what you do. And if you fail the first time, understand that that makes you even more set up to succeed the second time. And shit, maybe it won't be the second time. Maybe it'll be the third or the fourth. Hopefully that provides a little bit of perspective. And last thing, HELOC. I'm going to plug this home equity line of credit. And this is super freaking nerdy.
You should have a shirt that just says HELOC.
Okay. So let's say you got a $500,000. Let's say let's just go up for easy numbers. I'm not saying everyone needs over $1 million. Let's say you have $1 million house and you have paid into it for many years, and it's 500,000 you owe on it, you own 500 of that. You can go to a bank and they will loan you with a line of credit a percentage of that amount. Like the ones here in Virginia Beach, the Bayport, which is the best one, they'll do like up to 90%. So, you could go get like 450 grand that you can now use for whatever the hell you want. Hey, you want to do that home improvement project, get the wife a new kitchen, whatever it is, do the new deck. Of course, you can use it for that, but guess what? You can use that for other business ventures. And of course, we already hit risk, so I'm not going to hit it again. But that's an opportunity for people to start maneuvering and playing some hands on the side and increasing their financial position. And I use that. Obviously, I floated it to Born Primitive at one point so we could freaking pay our bills. But I've also used that to acquire other real estate. So I'm literally leveraging one house to buy the next. I'm writing off the interest, and assuming I crunched my numbers correctly on this next investment, I'm really not taking any risk. Of course, there's risk with anything, but I'm using the bank's money to get more assets underneath me. And then I did that with the next one and the next one and the next one. Whereas people don't even know the existence of these opportunities. You know what I mean? So I think we're going to have maybe a real estate episode, fairly soon. We can get more into it, but I just encourage people to seek out that knowledge. This is not earth-shattering stuff. And if you're in a rut and you're like, what do I do? Hey, pick up a book, Real Estate for Dummies or whatever it is. Gain knowledge, but there's ways you can leverage your own assets to acquire more assets. And once that ball is rolling, it gets even easier. The first one's the hardest. And then, once you stack up a few wins, it's like, this is too easy. But I think a lot of people just don't have that knowledge, and, people are perpetually renting their entire life. I think definitely get out of that. I've been a purchaser since in my early 20s. Like even when Mal and I bought our house in Indianapolis, I think we bought it for 180 grand, even though I knew I was like leaving for the Navy in 2 years, like we just bought. And, when we sold it, I think we sold it for like 230 or something. So that's like, okay, that's 50K in equity right there, plus probably another 20 or 30 that you had paid through your mortgage payments. So like out of nowhere, we had 80 grand in our checking account. We're like, holy shit, we're rich. You know what I mean? Had we just decided, hey, let's play it safe, let's just rent up in north side of Indianapolis, we would have moved out and there would have been no money in our bank account. We just did that with this office building that we just sold. Mal and I decided, hey, rather than be a landlord and a tenant, let's buy an office building. That way, Born Primitive is paying us as owners, in its different entity. It goes in one pocket, goes in the other, right? We pay the mortgage, Born Primitive pays us to rent the building. And we had this building for like 3 years, and we'll have it, we have a lease on it now. But randomly out of nowhere, now there's 200 grand in your checking account that you wouldn't even have noticed. Had we just said, hey, it's easier, let's just go rent an office building, that would have been what 19 out of 20 business owners would have done. Okay, well, when that lease ends, there's nothing, that money's gone, right? So I just think there's a lot of ways that even you don't need to be making a ton of money to start positioning your own financial, situation to play the long game. And then by the time you're 50, it's like passive income through the roof. You can relax. Hopefully your retirement's funded. You're doing well. You know what I mean? But if you've been renting since 20 to 45, all of that money went down the drain when you could have been gaining equity in all kinds of different ways. So, I don't want to go on a tangent, but for those home equity, line of credit, HELOC, it might serve you. Like, if you want to do a new deck, or I would argue like, hey, use that and invest it in something. And don't bet the ranch completely, but you can make a few strategic bets and start improving your financial position to play the long game.
I'm going to get you a shirt that says, ask me about HELOC.
Well, dude, the Bayport down the road, I'm like, because I'm so enthusiastic about it, because theirs does 90%.
That's
the previous, it actually does 95% if you want, and I don't want to go. They have an option if you do the 90% one. The first 15 years, you only pay interest. Now, you can pay principal, but your minimum payments monthly is interest only. So let's say you needed to float yourself for, let's say, 3 years. You had to take it on the chin. Well, you can put that in, and you're paying the minimum payments every month. And at the end of the 15 years, they turn it into a term loan, as if it's like a house mortgage, and now it's principal and interest, and you pay it off for the next 15 years. So you just, basically over a 30-year horizon, and they'll do up to 90%. The previous one I had was, I think it was 60% of that. And then I realized that with Bayport, I was like, well, this is a way better package. So I got rid of that one. I reappraised my house. So you realize what that new equity value is. And then they do the calculation. And then it's literally just it's like a giant credit card that you can use it for whatever. So if you wanted to wire $200,000 tomorrow to invest in some new business that you think is going to kill it, you can do it. Now the interest payments will start immediately the next month, but it'll be the minimum. It'll probably be like $3,000 a month. You know what I mean? Of course, you eventually have to pay it back. It's not like you're off the hook.
Yeah.
So don't act like it's house money, because it is real and it's real debt. But that could be a great way, like with the house you have, I bet we could do a HELOC on that, and you and I could go find a place to buy that would cash flow positive. You use that extra cash flow to start paying that HELOC back down until it's to zero. And then guess what? I say, Tony, now we're going to do a HELOC on that. We're going to call your new rental property, we're going to call it a second home. We're going to HELOC both of them. And we're going to take that money, we're going to go buy an even more cash flow positive property because it's going to be more expensive, right? And guess what? Now we use that cash flow to pay both of them down. Now you have an extra 2 properties that are cash flowing, and you see quickly how you can build that roadmap. And again, I'm not an expert. So like the way I did it is, there might be a real estate guy listening like, oh, this guy's full of shit. I'm just saying I've done that, and I now have 5 houses on the beach. And it wasn't rocket science. It was literally just like a math problem that like made sense. I did thread a good window with the COVID, like people with short-term rentals, like it was the thing for a while. Interest was like 3%. So I saw that opportunity, and I went. I mean, one of them paying I think 2.8%. It's like free money, right? And so the going isn't quite as good, right? Like it was. And if you're going to pay 7-8%, especially if it's an investment property, they charge you more on the mortgage rate. So all that to consider, but that's something you and I could sit down and we do the math and say, shit, all right, if this cash flow is $800 a month. All right, how long would it take to get that HELOC down? What additional cash flow are you producing from Born Primitive that maybe you can throw another $500 a month towards it? Okay, what's the horizon? When would that be back to zero and we could use it again? And it might be 10 years. But hey, in 10 years, you can go buy the second property. So when you're 60, you got 4 or 5 houses that are cash flowing you and they're paid off. Or you sell them all, put it in a trust with your kids, and you know what I mean? And then they're good, so it's the long game approach. And obviously the more aggressive you are, the higher upside, but of course the more risk that comes with it too. So
we could do a full, we've touched on that before, and maybe the guy we're having on, you guys can go deep on it. Cause it is really fat. Like even I've heard you talk about it several times now, and I still didn't know it was 90%.
Yeah.
That's insane.
That's the one I just got. I didn't know it was either. And now I got my brother Mike getting it. He's going to put in like a new pool and shit in the backyard with it. I won't shut up about this damn HELOC. And part of it's probably this freaking energy. I don't want to give him a cheesy plug, but this is the new Black Rifle Coffee energy drink. They sent us a case. It's really freaking good. And
is the taste similar to like a normal energy drink taste?
Yeah, this one's like, it's called Ranger Berry. Really good, 0 sugar. It's got 200 milligrams, which is like kind of what I want. I don't typically like the 300 because then I'm not working out. Well, I haven't been doing caffeine for a long time now, but 300 if you're not working out is just like, a lot.
It should just say anxiety on the can.
100%. Yeah. And yeah, you could tell that started hitting me towards the end as I start talking about a freaking HELOC on the podcast.
Automatic. As soon as caffeine exceeds 150, you're like HELOC. Anybody want to talk about HELOC?
All right. Well, sorry for going on a tangent, y'all, but maybe there's one person here that's going to go home to their wife tonight or husband and say, hey, we should look into that HELOC because we could then do X, Y, Z. Yep. This caveman bear was telling me about it on the podcast. But hey, guys, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate it. As always, it really helps us out if you can like and subscribe, comment, all those things, engage in the social stuff. Hope you got some value out of this, and hope everyone has a good week.
Thanks, everyone.